The blood-red sun sank below the rugged horizon, casting long shadows across Elijah's Creek as Abram Northcott reined in his horse at the edge of town, his hand instinctively moving to the scar that ran along his ribcage, a permanent reminder of what trusting the wrong person could cost a man. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The dusty main street of Elijah's Creek bustled with the usual evening activity as Abram dismounted, his tall frame and weathered features drawing a few curious glances from locals. He'd been gone nearly 2 years, and though the town hadn't changed much, he had. The sorrel gelding nickered softly as Abram loosened the cinch. "Easy there, copper," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We'll get you settled soon enough." When he'd left Elijah's Creek, it had been with a woman's promise in his ear and hope in his heart. He'd returned alone with nothing but copper, his Colt revolver, and a vow never to be that vulnerable again. The Bull's Horn Saloon glowed with lamplight, piano music drifting through the batwing doors. Abram hesitated before pushing through, the familiar smell of whiskey, tobacco, and sweat enveloping him. A few old faces nodded in recognition, but most patrons barely glanced up from their cards or drinks. "Well, I'll be damned," came a familiar voice. Walter Jenkins, the barkeep, grinned broadly. "Thought you'd gone and got yourself killed somewhere, Northcott." Abram's lips quirked in what passed for a smile these days. "Not for lack of trying, Walt. The usual? Make it a double." Walt slid a glass across the bar, amber liquid sloshing against its sides. "You planning on staying around this time?" "Got nowhere else to be," Abram replied, then downed the whiskey in one swallow. The burn was welcome, familiar. Heard old man Harrison might be hiring hands at his place. "Harrison passed last winter," Walt said, refilling Abram's glass. "His daughter runs the spread now." Abram frowned. Thought Harrison only had sons. Had a stepdaughter. From his second wife. Girl came back from some fancy school back east when Harrison took ill. Walt leaned forward. "Name's Sophia Reed. Pretty as a picture and twice as stubborn. Been fighting off every snake oil businessman and would-be suitor trying to take the ranch off her hands." Abram's interest was purely practical. The Harrison Ranch was one of the largest in the county. If the woman needed hands, it meant steady work. "She hiring?" he asked. Walt nodded. "Been putting up notices every week. Lost a bunch of hands when her father died. Some didn't cotton to taking orders from a woman." Abram finished his second whiskey. "Reckon I'll ride out there tomorrow." "Might want to clean up a bit first," Walt suggested, eyeing Abram's trail-worn appearance. "Miss Reed runs a tight ship." After securing a room above the saloon, Abram spent a restless night, haunted by old memories. Dawn found him at the washbasin, razor scraping away 2 weeks of beard growth. The face that stared back from the spotted mirror was leaner than he remembered. Lines etched around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before Elizabeth. He pushed the thought away. Elizabeth Cooper was in the past, along with all the foolish dreams he'd once harbored. The Harrison Ranch lay 5 miles outside town, a sprawling operation of good grazing land bordered by mountains to the north. As Abram approached the main house, a 2-story affair of solid timber, he noticed the barn needed repairs and several fence sections had fallen into disrepair. A young boy of about 12 was struggling with a water pump when Abram dismounted. "Need a hand with that?" Abram asked. The boy looked up, squinting against the sun. "You a drifter?" "Name's Abram Northcott. Looking for work." The boy sized him up. "Miss Sophia's in the barn. I'm Timothy, but everyone calls me Tim." Abram nodded and led Copper toward the large barn. Inside, he could hear a woman's voice, frustrated and sharp. "Damnation, hold still." Following the sound, he found a woman wrestling with a fractious young colt. She wore men's trousers under a split riding skirt, Her sleeves rolled up to reveal slender arms that were nonetheless corded with muscle. Her dark hair was coming loose from its pins, curls escaping around a face flushed with exertion. "Need a hand, madam?" Abram asked. She startled, turning quickly, and the colt took advantage of her distraction to pull free. The animal bolted toward the open barn door. Without thinking, Abram stepped into its path, hands raised calmly. "Whoa there, boy," he said in the low, steady voice that had gentled countless horses. The colt skidded to a halt, nostrils flaring. Abram approached slowly, murmuring soft words, until he could take hold of the lead rope dangling from the colt's halter. The young horse trembled but remained still. When he turned back to the woman, she was watching him with narrowed eyes the color of a summer storm. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Abram Northcott, madam. Heard you might be hiring ranch hands." She brushed a lock of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "And where did you hear that?" "Walt Jenkins, over at the Bull's Horn." Something in her posture eased slightly. "You know horses." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Yes, madam." "Can you mend fences? Fix a roof? Work cattle?" "Been doing it most of my life." She studied him for a long moment. "I can pay $30 a month plus room and board." It was fair wage, especially with meals included. Abram nodded. "When do you want me to start?" "There's a bunkhouse behind the main house. You can put your things there." She took the lead rope from him, her fingers briefly brushing his. "I'm Sophia Reed." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Reed." Her lips quirked slightly. "We'll see if you still feel that way after a week of working here, Mr. Northcott." The bunkhouse housed only 3 other men. An older ranch hand named Hank who'd been with the Harrison place for 15 years, a wiry Mexican called Diego who barely spoke English, and a young man fresh from Tennessee named Luke who couldn't have been more than 19. Boss lady's got her hands full, Hank told Abram that evening as they ate stew provided by the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters. Most hands left when old Harrison died. Some of the neighboring ranchers been making trouble too, especially that snake Dawson. "What kind of trouble?" Abram asked. Hank shrugged. "Trying to push her to sell. Cattle gone missing. Accidents happening. Nothing that can be pinned on anyone specific, you understand." Abram understood perfectly. A woman alone trying to run a ranch this size would be seen as easy pickings by some. "She seems capable enough," he remarked. Hank snorted. "More than capable. Girl grew up on horseback till her mama sent her east to become a lady. Fat lot of good that did. First thing she did when she came back was put on her pa's old trousers so she could ride proper." Over the next few days, Abram fell into the rhythm of ranch life. He rose before dawn, worked until dusk, and collapsed into his bunk each night too tired to dream. It suited him just fine. Physical exhaustion was preferable to the thoughts that plagued him during idle moments. Sophia Reed was everywhere checking fences, doctoring sick calves, arguing with the foreman of a cattle drive passing through their land. She rode like she'd been born in the saddle, handled a rifle with confidence, and didn't shy away from the dirtiest jobs. But Abram also noticed how she sat straight-backed at dinner, how she spoke with the precise diction of someone educated in the East, how she sometimes stared at the distant mountains with something like longing in her eyes. A week into his employment, Abram was repairing the barn roof when he heard shouting from the direction of the main house. He clambered down the ladder to see Sophia facing off with a man in an expensive suit, their voices carrying across the yard. "Absolutely final, Mr. Dawson. This ranch is not for sale at any price." The man, presumably the troublemaking neighbor Hank had mentioned, stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. "Don't be a fool, Miss Reed. You can't run this place by yourself. I'm managing just fine." "Are you? I heard you lost 20 head last month." How long before you're forced to sell for half what I'm offering now? Sophia's back was ramrod straight. Get off my property. Dawson's hand shot out, gripping her arm. Listen here, Abram was across the yard before he'd made the conscious decision to move. The lady asked you to leave, he said, his voice deceptively calm as he positioned himself between Sophia and Dawson. The rancher released Sophia's arm, scowling. And who might you be? Someone who doesn't like seeing a man put his hands on a woman without her permission. Dawson's eyes narrowed as he took in Abram's weathered appearance, the calloused hands, the way he stood slightly angled, ready for trouble. Whatever he saw made him take a step back. This isn't over, Sophia, he said, then turned and strode toward his waiting horse. When the man had ridden away, Sophia exhaled sharply. Thank you, Mr. Northcott, but I can handle Russell Dawson. Never doubted it, madam, Abram replied, tipping his hat and turning to go back to his work. Mr. Northcott, she called after him. When he looked back, she added, the roof can wait. I'd like you to ride the north pasture with me. We've been having trouble with fences there. They rode in companionable silence for the first mile, Sophia leading the way on a spirited bay mare. When they reached the fence line, it was obvious someone had deliberately cut the wire in several places. Dawson, Abram asked, crouching to examine the clean cuts. Sophia dismounted, her expression grim. Can't prove it, but yes, I suspect so. He wants the water rights to this land. My father refused to sell to him for years. Abram began gathering the tools they'd need from his saddlebags. You planning to stay and fight then? This ranch is all I have left of my father, she said simply. I won't give it up. As they worked side by side repairing the fence, Abram found himself studying her from the corner of his eye. Her hands were blistered, but she never complained, just worked methodically beside him in the hot sun. You've been a cowhand long? She asked after a while. Most of my life, Abram replied. Started working cattle when I was 14. You must have seen a lot of the country. He nodded. Texas, Kansas, Montana. Drove cattle up the Chisholm Trail 3 times. Sounds like freedom, she said softly, and he caught that look in her eyes again, the one that seemed to be searching for something beyond the horizon. Some might call it that. But not you, she asked, surprisingly perceptive. Abram hammered a post with more force than necessary. Running's not the same as being free, Miss Reed. She looked at him sharply, but didn't press further. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the landscape in golds and crimsons. Sophia kept her horse alongside his, no longer ahead. If Dawson's behind the missing cattle, he'll try again, she said as the ranch buildings came into view. Likely, Abram agreed. Might be worth setting up a watch rotation. She nodded. I'll talk to Hank about it. We're short-handed, but a gunshot cracked through the evening air. Sophia's horse reared, and she clung to the saddle as the animal bolted forward. Abram spurred Copper after them, scanning the ridgeline where the shot had come from. He caught up to Sophia 100 yards later when she'd managed to bring her horse under control. Are you hit? He demanded, eyes searching for any sign of blood. No, she gasped, still fighting to calm her mare. But that was no accident. Abram's jaw tightened as he looked back toward the ridge. Whoever had fired the shot was gone now. No, madam, that was a warning. That night, after checking the horses one last time, Abram found Sophia sitting alone on the porch of the main house, a rifle across her lap. You should get some sleep, Miss Reed, he said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. So should you, Mr. Northcott. Despite her calm tone, he could see the tension in her shoulders. Someone shot at me today. I doubt I'll sleep much regardless. Against his better judgment, Abram climbed the steps and settled into the chair beside hers. I can keep watch for a spell. She glanced at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. And who watches you, Mr. Northcott? Haven't needed anyone to in a long time. The night was cool, crickets chirping in the darkness beyond the circle of lamplight spilling from the house windows. For a long while they sat in silence. My father used to sit out here every evening, Sophia said eventually. Said he could feel the land better from this porch than anywhere else on the ranch. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Her voice softened. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to love this place. My mother hated it. She was from Boston originally. Never did adapt to frontier life. When I was 12, she finally convinced him to let her take me east for a proper education. Abram could hear the quotation marks around the words. Didn't take. She laughed softly. Oh, it took. I can play the piano, embroider a handkerchief, and recite poetry in 3 languages. I just never saw the point of any of it. She shifted the rifle on her lap. When word came that father was ill, I didn't hesitate. Packed my things and was on the next train west. In time to say goodbye? Her face shadowed. Barely. He held on long enough to make me promise I wouldn't sell the ranch. Made it official in his will too. This place is mine as long as I want to keep it. Dawson knows that? He does. Doesn't stop him from trying to run me off, so I'll have no choice but to sell. She looked at him directly. What about you, Mr. Northcott? What are you running from? The question hit too close to home. Abram stood abruptly. I should check the stock one more time before turning in. He felt her watching him as he walked away, but she didn't call after him. Just as well. Some stories weren't meant to be shared, especially with employers who already had troubles enough of their own. The next morning brought rain, turning the ranch yard into a sea of mud. Abram spent the day in the barn, making repairs that had been neglected for too long. When Sophia appeared in the doorway late in the afternoon, her clothes were soaked through and her face was drawn with exhaustion. 2 more calves missing, she said without preamble. Cut clean from the herd at the South Range. Abram set down his hammer. In this weather? That's bold. Or desperate. She pushed wet hair from her face. I need your help, Mr. Northcott. I can't be everywhere at once, and Hank's not as quick with a gun as he used to be. What are you asking, exactly? She met his eyes directly. I want to catch whoever's stealing my cattle. Tonight. It was foolhardy at best. The 2 of them, waiting in a cold, wet forest on the off chance the rustlers would strike again so soon. But there was a determination in Sophia's eyes that brooked no argument, and if he was honest with himself, Abram admired her grit. They set out after dinner, telling the others they were checking fence lines before the creek flooded. Sophia rode beside him, a slicker covering her clothing, her rifle secured in its scabbard. There's a ridge overlooking the south pasture, she explained as they rode. Good view of the whole area. If someone tries to cut cattle from the herd, we'll see them. The rain had tapered to a drizzle by the time they reached the spot she described. It was a defensible position with good sight lines, the kind of place Abram would have chosen himself. They dismounted and secured their horses a short distance away, then settled behind an outcropping of rocks to wait. Hours passed. The temperature dropped, and Abram noticed Sophia shivering despite her slicker. Here, he said, shrugging out of his coat and offering it to her. I'm fine, she insisted. You're freezing, Miss Reed. And I need you steady if we have to shoot. She accepted the coat with reluctant grace, draping it over her shoulders. Thank you. Been meaning to ask, Abram said, keeping his voice low. Why didn't you just hire a foreman to run things? Someone with experience. Would have saved you a lot of trouble. She was quiet so long he thought she might not answer. I tried, she finally admitted. 3 different men. First one embezzled from the accounts. Second was in Dawson's pocket from the start. Third, she trailed off. Let's just say he thought his position entitled him to certain liberties. Abram's jaw tightened. What happened to him? A small, fierce smile crossed her face. I introduced him to the business end of my rifle. He decided to seek employment elsewhere. Despite himself, Abram chuckled. Remind me not to cross you, Miss Reed. You can call me Sophia, you know, she said softly. When it's just us. The unexpected offer of familiarity caught him off guard. Might not be proper. Proper. She almost spat the word. I've had enough proper to last a lifetime. Before he could respond, movement in the valley below caught his attention. He touched Sophia's arm, nodding toward the shadowy figures approaching the herd. 3 of them, she whispered, rifle already in position. Abram squinted through the darkness. 4. There's another by that stand of trees. The rustlers worked with practiced efficiency, cutting 4 calves from the herd and driving them toward the tree line. Sophia made to rise, but Abram held her back. Wait, he murmured. Let's see where they're taking them. She nodded tightly, and they watched as the rustlers disappeared into the forest with their stolen cattle. As soon as they were out of sight, Abram and Sophia hurried to their horses and followed at a discreet distance. The trail was easy enough to follow. Even in the dark, 4 men and 4 calves left clear tracks in the muddy ground. After about 2 miles, they came upon a small clearing where the rustlers had gathered, the stolen calves penned temporarily by rope strung between trees. Abram signaled for Sophia to circle around to the far side of the clearing while he approached from the opposite direction. She nodded, understanding his strategy without need for explanation. The rustlers were arguing amongst themselves, unaware of the approaching danger. Said there wouldn't be no one watching in this weather. One of them was saying, his voice agitated. Shut up, Peters, replied another. Job's done. We get these marked with Dawson's brand by morning. Ain't nobody can prove nothing. Sophia's rifle cracked from across the clearing. The shot went high, deliberately so, but it sent the rustlers diving for cover. That's far enough, Abram called out, his own weapon trained on the group. Next shot won't miss. We're on Harrison land, Sophia added, her voice carrying clearly. And you're stealing Harrison cattle. There was a tense moment of silence. Then one of the men called back, Ain't no law says we gotta do what some woman tells us. A shot rang out, kicking up dirt near Abram's feet. He returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flash. Someone yelped in pain. You got a choice, Abram shouted. Surrender now, face the sheriff in Elijah's Creek. Or keep shooting and face your maker instead. For answer, 2 more shots came their way. Sophia fired back. Her aim true, one of the rustlers cried out and fell. The odds had shifted. Last chance, Abram warned. A heartbeat of silence. Then, all right, don't shoot. We're coming out. 3 men emerged from behind their cover, hands raised. The 4th lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder where Sophia's bullet had found its mark. Tie them up, Sophia ordered Abram, keeping her rifle trained on the group. We'll take them back to the ranch and send for the sheriff in the morning. As Abram bound the men's hands, he recognized one of them as a hand who'd worked briefly at the Harrison ranch the previous month. The man avoided his gaze, shamefaced. Dawson put you up to this? Abram asked him directly. The man glanced nervously at his companions. Don't know what you're talking about. Lying won't help you now, Sophia said, approaching. In the moonlight, with rain dripping from the brim of her hat and her rifle held confidently in her hands, she looked every inch the formidable rancher. Dawson's name has already been mentioned. How long have you been stealing my cattle for him? The wounded man groaned. We ain't saying nothing without a lawyer. Suit yourself, she replied coolly. Sheriff Evans will be interested to hear what we overhead about Dawson's brand. Regardless. They herded the rustlers and the recovered calves back to the ranch, arriving well after midnight. Hank and Diego were roused to help secure the prisoners in the storage cellar until morning. "I'll ride for the sheriff at first light," Hank promised, eyeing the captured men with disgust. Sophia nodded tiredly. "Thank you, Hank. And thank you, Mr. Northcott," she added, turning to Abram. "I couldn't have done this without you. Just doing my job, Miss Reed." Her eyes lingered on his face. "No, you went well beyond that." She hesitated, then added, "Would you join me for a drink? I think we've earned one." In the main house, Sophia poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter that had likely belonged to her father. The study was masculine in its furnishings: leather chairs, bookshelves, a large desk covered in ledgers and maps. "To success," she said, raising her glass. Abram clinked his glass against hers. "To justice." The whiskey was good, warming him from the inside out after the long, cold night. Sophia sank into a chair by the fireplace, which Mrs. Winters had thoughtfully lit before retiring. "Dawson won't take this lying down," Abram warned, taking the seat opposite her. "I know." She sipped her whiskey, firelight playing across her features. "But with his men in custody and the sheriff involved, he'll have to be more careful. It buys us time." "Time for what?" She looked at him directly. "Time to strengthen our position. Hire more hands. Improve security." A slight pause. "If you're willing to stay on, that is." There was a question in her eyes that went beyond simple employment. Abram looked away, uncomfortable with the direction his thoughts were taking. "I'm not going anywhere just yet," he said carefully. She nodded, accepting his non-committal answer. "Good, because I think Dawson was just the beginning of our troubles." Sheriff Evans arrived late the next morning, a stocky man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes. He listened to their account, examined the evidence including the rustlers' own admissions about Dawson's involvement, and took the prisoners into custody. "This is serious business, Miss Reed," Evans said as his deputy loaded the bound men into a wagon. "Dawson's got friends in the territorial government. He won't take kindly to these accusations." "They're not accusations, Sheriff," Sophia replied firmly. "They're facts. Those men were stealing my cattle on Dawson's orders." Evans sighed. "Facts need witnesses willing to testify in court. These boys might change their tune once Dawson's lawyer gets to them." "Then what do you suggest?" she demanded. "Be careful," the sheriff said simply. "Watch your back. And maybe consider if this ranch is worth your life." After Evans departed, Sophia's mood was dark. She threw herself into work with single-minded determination, as if trying to outrun her frustrations. 3 days later, Dawson made his move. Abram was splitting wood behind the bunkhouse when he heard the approaching riders. 12 men, Dawson at their head, dust rising behind them as they thundered into the ranch yard. He set down his axe and moved quickly toward the main house, where Sophia had emerged onto the porch, rifle in hand. Hank and Diego flanked her, similarly armed. Dawson reined in his horse, his expression thunderous. "You've gone too far this time, Sophia," he called. "Accusing me of rustling? Having my men arrested? You'll regret that." "Your men confessed, Russell," she replied evenly. "The sheriff has their statements. We'll see how much those statements are worth." Dawson's gaze shifted to Abram as he positioned himself at the bottom of the porch steps. "Found yourself a new attack dog, I see. State your business and then get off my land," Sophia said coldly. Dawson's smile was unpleasant. "I came to give you one last chance. Sell to me now, or I won't be responsible for what happens next." "Is that a threat?" "A promise." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You're alone out here, Sophia. Sheriff's a half-day's ride away. Accidents happen on ranches all the time. Abram took a step forward. She's not alone. Dawson's eyes narrowed as he took Abram's measure. For against 12. Not odds I'd bet on, Cowboy. Then it's fortunate no one asked you to, Abram replied. For a tense moment it seemed Dawson might order his men to attack then and there. But apparently he thought better of it. This isn't over, he said, wheeling his horse around. Not by a long shot. As the riders departed, Sophia's hands were white-knuckled around her rifle. He'll be back, she said quietly. Abram nodded. With more men, likely. Or he'll try something more underhanded, she agreed. Hank, we need to double the watch tonight. No one rides alone from now on. That evening, they gathered in the main house to formulate a plan. Maps of the ranch were spread across the dining table, key areas marked for patrol. We should send for help, Luke suggested. Maybe some of the other ranchers. Most of them are friends with Dawson, Hank cut in, or too scared to cross him. Sophia traced a boundary line on the map. We defend what we have. Increase patrols. Keep the cattle close to the ranch house for now. And if Dawson brings in hired guns? Abram asked quietly. The question hung in the air. None of them had an answer. Later, after the others had gone to their bunks, Abram found Sophia still at the dining table, head bent over the ranch accounts. You should rest, he said from the doorway. She looked up, shadows under her eyes. So should you. He moved into the room, stopping beside her chair. Dawson was right about one thing. The odds aren't in our favor. Are you suggesting I give up? There was a challenge in her voice. No. Abram met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting we get creative. They talked long into the night, formulating strategies, weighing options. Somewhere in those hours, the dynamic between them shifted subtly. It was no longer employer and employee but partners facing a common enemy. As dawn approached, Sophia finally set down her pencil. Thank you, Abram, she said, his given name crossing her lips for the first time. For everything. Just doing what needs doing, he replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. She studied him in the lamplight. No, you're doing far more than that. A pause. Why? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? You could have moved on weeks ago. Found work somewhere without all this trouble. Her eyes searched his. Why stay and fight for a ranch that isn't yours? The answer came to him unbidden. Because you're fighting for it. But he couldn't say that. Wouldn't acknowledge the dangerous territory his thoughts had wandered into. Got nowhere better to be, he said instead, rising from his chair. And I don't much like bullies. Her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she let it pass. Get some sleep, Abram. Tomorrow will be a long day. The next week passed in a state of constant vigilance. Cattle were brought in from the far pastures, valuables secured, weapons cleaned and loaded. Dawson's men were spotted near the property line several times but never crossed over. The waiting was wearing on everyone's nerves. Tempers flared over small things. Even Sophia's composure showed cracks around the edges. It was Luke who spotted the smoke, first a thin column rising from the direction of the north pasture. By the time they reached it, the line cabin there was fully engulfed in flames. Damn him! Sophia raged, watching helplessly as the structure burned. That cabin's been standing since my grandfather's time. Abram scanned the surrounding ridgeline, rifle at the ready. This is just the beginning, he said grimly. He's testing our response. She looked at him sharply. You've seen this before? Range wars operate by a familiar playbook. He didn't elaborate on how he knew, and she didn't ask. Dawson's sending a message. Next time it'll be something more valuable. That night it was the hay barn. The following afternoon, A fence line was cut and a dozen cattle scattered before they could be rounded up. Each incident drew their limited resources thinner, exactly as Dawson intended. After the third night of little sleep and constant alerts, Sophia approached Abram as he saddled Copper for patrol. "This can't continue," she said, her voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. "We're being worn down deliberately." Abram tightened the cinch, nodding. "That's the strategy. Exhaust us, then strike when we're too tired to defend properly. Then we need to change the game." Her eyes were bright with determination. "I want to take the fight to Dawson." He stared at her. "That's suicide." "Not a direct attack," she clarified. "But I'm tired of waiting for him to make the next move. I want to confront him in town, in public, where he can't simply gun me down." "And say what, exactly?" "I don't know yet." She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident. "But doing nothing isn't working." Abram secured his rifle in its scabbard. "Give me 24 hours, he said. "I have an idea, but I need to ride to Elijah's Creek first." "What kind of idea?" "The kind that might end this without anyone else getting hurt." He swung into the saddle. "Trust me." The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Trust wasn't something either of them gave easily. "I do," she said finally, and the simple declaration hit him like a physical blow. Abram returned from town the following evening, a rolled document secure in his saddlebag. He found Sophia in the barn, tending to her mare's injured leg. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Did you find what you needed?" "I think so." He produced the document, handing it to her. Land records for the county going back 30 years. She frowned, unrolling the papers. "Why would these help us?" "Look at the original survey of the Harrison property," Abram directed. "Specifically the northern boundary." As Sophia examined the documents, understanding dawned on her face. "This shows the boundary line a half-mile north of where Dawson's fence currently stands." Abram nodded. "Your father may have been too ill to notice when Dawson moved his fence line, but according to these records, he's been grazing his cattle on Harrison land for at least 5 years. And that water source he's so desperate to control rightfully belongs to you," Abram finished. "Always has." A slow smile spread across Sophia's face. "This changes everything." The next morning, they rode into Elijah's Creek together, the land records safely tucked into Sophia's saddlebag. Sheriff Evans met them outside his office, his expression grim. "Heard about the trouble out your way," he said by way of greeting. "Dawson's in town, by the way, over at the hotel." "Good," Sophia replied. "I have something to discuss with him." The sheriff's eyes widened. Miss Reed, that might not be wise, but she was already striding toward the hotel, Abram at her side. The Russell Dawson they found in the hotel dining room was the picture of smug confidence, enjoying a leisurely breakfast with 2 of his men. His expression darkened when he saw them approach. Well, to what do I owe this pleasure, Sophia? Finally come to your senses about selling." "Actually, Russell, I've come about a different matter entirely." She laid the survey documents on the table before him. "It seems we have a boundary dispute to resolve." Dawson barely glanced at the papers. "What nonsense is this?" "Official land surveys from the county records," Sophia replied coolly, "showing quite clearly that you've moved your fence line onto Harrison property. Half a mile onto Harrison property, to be precise." The dining room had gone quiet, other patrons watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Dawson's face flushed. "These records are outdated. Your father and I had an arrangement. Do you have documentation of this arrangement?" Abram cut in. "Stay out of this, Cowboy," Dawson snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "Mr. Northcott is my ranch foreman," Sophia said smoothly, the unexpected promotion catching Abram by surprise. And this very much concerns him, as it concerns all Harrison Ranch business. She leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. Here's what's going to happen, Russell. You're going to move your fence back to the proper boundary line. You're going to cease all hostilities against my ranch and my people. And you're going to pay restitution for 5 years of grazing your cattle on my land without permission. Dawson's laugh was ugly. Or what? Or I file a formal complaint with the Territorial Land Office, she replied evenly. I petition for a new survey, which will confirm what these documents already show. And then I sue you for every penny you've made from cattle fattened on my grass and watered from my springs. The confidence in Dawson's expression wavered slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? She straightened, gathering the documents. I suppose we'll find out. I'll be at the land office in Cheyenne next week to file my complaint. Unless, of course, I see your men moving that fence back where it belongs before then. As they turned to leave, Dawson called after them, This isn't over, Sophia. She paused, looking back at him with perfect composure. For your sake, Russell, I hope it is, because if you force this to court, I won't stop at the boundary line. I'll have questions about those rustlers working for you too, and I suspect the territorial marshal might be interested in the answers. Outside, in the bright Wyoming sunlight, Sophia's composure finally cracked. Her hands trembled slightly as she mounted her horse. You did well in there, Abram said quietly, swinging into his own saddle. He's not beaten yet, she warned. He might still try something desperate. Maybe. But you've changed the stakes. Made it too costly for him to keep pushing. Abram adjusted his hat against the sun. It was a smart play. She looked at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. We make a good team, don't we? The words stirred something in Abram's chest that he'd thought long dead. That we do, Miss Reed. That we do. They were halfway back to the ranch when riders appeared on the road ahead. 4 of Dawson's men, guns drawn. Looks like Russell didn't appreciate your ultimatum, Abram said quietly, moving his horse closer to Sophia's. This is as far as you go, called one of the men, a burly fellow with a week's growth of beard. Boss has a message for you. Sophia's hand moved subtly toward her rifle. I think I've heard all Russell has to say. Then hear this instead, the man replied, raising his pistol. The Harrison Ranch will be Dawson property by sundown, one way or another. Abram drew his revolver in one fluid motion. For against 2. Better odds than Dawson mentioned the other day. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from behind them came the sound of approaching horses. Abram risked a glance over his shoulder to see Sheriff Evans and 3 deputies riding hard toward them. Dawson's men exchanged uncertain looks. Their leader spat in the dirt. This ain't finished, he growled, before wheeling his horse around. The 4 galloped away across the open range. Sheriff Evans reined in beside them, his expression thunderous. Thought you might need some company on the ride home, he said. Dawson was making threats after you left the hotel. Thank you, Sheriff, Sophia said with genuine gratitude. Evans nodded grimly. I've tolerated Dawson's bullying for too long. Time someone stood up to him. He looked at Abram appraisingly. You her foreman now? Apparently so, Abram replied, still somewhat taken aback by the promotion. Good. She needs someone watching her back. Evans gathered his reins. We'll escort you to your property line. True to Evans's prediction, Dawson made no further moves against the Harrison Ranch that day. By the following morning, word had spread through the county about the boundary dispute and Sophia's threat of legal action. You've made an impression, Abram told her as they stood on the porch, watching a crew of Dawson's men reluctantly dismantling the boundary fence in the distance. Word in town is that the territorial judge is taking an interest in Dawson's activities. Good. Sophia folded her arms, satisfaction evident in her posture. Though I suspect this isn't truly over. No, Abram agreed. Men like Dawson don't surrender easily. She glanced at him. I meant what I said in town. About you being the foreman. I figured you were just saying that for Dawson's benefit. I wasn't. She turned to face him fully. The position is yours if you want it. The men respect you. She hesitated. I trust you. There it was again, that word that carried so much weight between them. Trust. Such a simple thing, and yet Abram had sworn never to extend it again after Elizabeth's betrayal. But Sophia Reed wasn't Elizabeth Cooper. She'd proven herself courageous, principled, determined. She fought for what was hers and didn't back down from threats. And somewhere along the way, without his conscious permission, Abram had begun to care what happened to her, to care about her. The realization was unsettling. I should probably tell you something, he said slowly, before you offer me a position of responsibility. Her expression grew cautious. What is it? Abram removed his hat, turning it in his hands. 2 years ago, I was foreman on a ranch in Montana. Fell in love with the owner's daughter, Elizabeth. We were to be married. The words came with difficulty. He hadn't spoken of Elizabeth to anyone since leaving Montana. She was beautiful, charming. Said she loved the land as much as I did. His jaw tightened at the memory. It was a lie. She was working with her lover, a banker who wanted the ranch. They planned to marry after her father died, sell the property, and move east. Sophia's expression softened with understanding. What happened? I overheard them one night, discussing their plans. When I confronted her. He touched the scar on his ribs unconsciously. Her lover tried to kill me. Nearly succeeded. Oh, Abram. By the time I recovered, they'd convinced everyone I was the villain. That I'd tried to force myself on Elizabeth. That her lover had defended her honor. His laugh was bitter. I left with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then, is that why you were so reluctant to get involved in the troubles here? Why you kept your distance? He nodded. Swore I'd never risk my heart like that again. Never trust anyone that completely. I understand, she said softly. After what happened with the previous foreman, I wasn't eager to trust either. She stepped closer. But here we are. Here we are, he echoed. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding. A recognition of kindred spirits who had both been wounded but were still standing. The foreman's position includes quarters in the main house, Sophia said, breaking the moment. If you accept, that is. Abram settled his hat back on his head. I accept. The coming weeks brought changes to the Harrison Ranch. With the boundary dispute resolved in Sophia's favor, Dawson had ultimately been unwilling to face a legal challenge that might expose his other activities. The atmosphere of siege lifted. New hands were hired to replace those who had left after Harrison's death. Repairs were made to buildings damaged during Dawson's campaign of intimidation. Abram settled into his role as foreman with a natural authority. The men respected his experience and fair-mindedness. Sophia respected his counsel, often seeking his advice on ranch decisions. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, sometimes sharing a quiet drink in the study after dinner. Abram found himself looking forward to those evening conversations, to Sophia's quick mind and occasional flashes of dry humor. Sometimes he caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes he realized he'd been watching her too, the graceful way she moved, the stubborn set of her chin when she'd made a decision, the rare full smile that transformed her face. It was dangerous territory, these thoughts, Abram reminded himself daily of the lessons learned in Montana. Trust came at too high a price, and yet. Autumn arrived, painting the landscape in golds and russets. Cattle were rounded up from summer pastures, calves counted and branded, preparations made for the coming winter. Word reached them that Russell Dawson had sold his ranch and departed for California, unwilling to face the social consequences of his failed campaign against Sophia. The news was met with relief at the Harrison Ranch, a weight lifting from everyone's shoulders. "We should celebrate," Sophia announced at dinner the evening after they heard the news. "Have a harvest dance. Invite the neighboring ranchers." "Mighty fine idea, Miss Reed," Hank agreed, the old ranch hand's weathered face creasing in a smile. "Been too long since this place had any proper festivities." Plans were made, invitations sent. The ranch house was cleaned from top to bottom, floors polished, silver buffed. Mrs. Winters baked for 3 days straight, filling the house with delicious aromas. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, stars brilliant in the Wyoming sky. Lanterns were strung across the yard, a platform constructed for the musicians brought in from town. Neighbors arrived in wagons and on horseback, the mood festive. Abram, uncomfortable in his best shirt and string tie, found himself watching the crowd from the edge of the gathering. Sophia moved among her guests with easy grace, her green dress catching the lantern light. She'd styled her hair differently for the occasion, soft curls framing her face. She was beautiful. The thought came unbidden, and Abram didn't try to push it away. "She cleans up nice, doesn't she?" Hank said, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of whiskey. Abram accepted the offered drink. "The ranch is looking good," he replied, deliberately misinterpreting. Hank snorted. "Wasn't talking about the ranch, and you know it." The old cowhand sipped his whiskey. "You two make a good team." "She's my employer," Abram said stiffly. "Aha!" Hank's tone was knowing. "And I'm the Queen of England." Before Abram could respond, Sophia spotted them and made her way over, cheeks flushed from dancing. "There you are," she said, smiling warmly. "Hiding in the shadows, both of you." Hank raised his glass in salute. "Just observing your success, Miss Reed. Fine gathering you've put together." "Thank you, Hank." She turned to Abram. "And you, Mr. Northcott? Are you enjoying yourself?" "It's a nice party," he replied honestly. "But you haven't danced once," she observed. "In fact, I don't believe I've ever seen you dance." Hank chuckled. "Take pity on the man, Miss Reed. He's been working since dawn. All the more reason he should enjoy himself now." She held out her hand to Abram. "Dance with me." The musicians were playing a waltz, couples circling the platform in time to the music. Abram hesitated, acutely aware of Hank's amused observation. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned. "Neither am I out here," Sophia replied. "But I was forced to learn all the proper steps back east, so between us we should manage." Her hand remained extended, an invitation and a challenge. Abram set down his whiskey and accepted it. She fit perfectly in his arms. He couldn't help but notice as they joined the other dancers. Her hand was warm in his, her waist slender beneath his other palm. "See? Not so terrible," she said as they found the rhythm of the waltz. "The company makes it bearable," he replied, surprising himself with the admission. Her eyes widened slightly, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. High praise indeed from a man who'd rather face rustlers than a dance floor. As they circled the platform, Abram was conscious of curious glances from the other guests. The Harrison Ranch foreman dancing with Miss Reed was fodder for gossip, no doubt. "People are watching," he murmured. "Let them," she said simply. "I'm tired of worrying about what others think." "Your reputation," is already that of an unconventional woman who wears trousers and runs her own ranch. Her eyes held his steadily. Dancing with my foreman is hardly going to shock anyone at this point. The music drew to a close, but neither of them moved immediately to separate. For a suspended moment, they remained in the dance position, something unspoken passing between them. Then someone called Sophia's name, breaking the spell. She stepped back, her hand lingering briefly in his before she turned to greet another guest. Abram retreated to the edge of the gathering once more, his thoughts in turmoil. What was he doing? Getting involved with his employer could only lead to complications, especially given his history. And yet, the memory of Sophia in his arms refused to fade. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Abram found himself on the porch, watching the last wagons disappear down the drive. The night had turned cool, stars brilliant overhead. "There you are," Sophia said, stepping outside to join him. She draped a shawl over her shoulders against the chill. "I thought you might have retired already." "Just getting some air," he replied. "It was a successful evening." "Yes." She moved to stand beside him at the porch railing. "Several of the neighboring ranchers mentioned they might be interested in partnering with us on the cattle drive next spring. It would make things easier pooling our resources." "Smart move," Abram agreed. "Strength in numbers." They fell into companionable silence, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them, distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the corral, crickets chirping in the tall grass. "Thank you," Sophia said after a while, "for dancing with me tonight." "My pleasure." She turned to face him, her expression serious in the lamplight. "I meant what I said before, about not caring what people think." Abram's heart rate quickened. "Sophia." "No, please let me finish." She took a deep breath. "When my father was dying, he made me promise two things. To keep the ranch and to be happy. I've managed the first, but the second." She shook her head slightly. "I thought running the ranch successfully would be enough. That proving myself capable would bring satisfaction." "Hasn't it?" Abram asked quietly. "It has," she acknowledged. "But it's not the same as happiness." Her eyes met his directly. "When I'm with you, though, I feel both, capable and happy." The admission hung between them, fraught with possibility and risk. Abram struggled to find the right words, torn between the growing feelings he could no longer deny and the fear that had governed him since Montana. "I'm not good at this," he finally said, his voice rough. "At trusting, at letting anyone close." "I know." She stepped nearer. "Neither am I." "What are you saying, Sophia?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Abram Northcott, more than I should, perhaps, as your employer." Her chin lifted with characteristic determination. "And I hope that you might feel something similar." The moment of truth. Abram could retreat, maintain the safe distance he'd kept from everyone since Elizabeth's betrayal. Or he could take the risk that Sophia Reed was nothing like Elizabeth Cooper, that she was exactly who she appeared to be. Strong, honest, principled. "I can't promise I won't be difficult," he said slowly. "Can't promise the past won't sometimes get in the way." Hope flickered in her eyes. "I'm not asking for promises, just possibility." Abram took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. "There's definitely possibility, Sophia Reed." Her smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. The winter of 1876-1877 was harsh, snowdrifts piling against the ranch buildings and temperatures dropping well below zero. But inside the Harrison main house, warmth prevailed. Abram and Sophia moved cautiously at first, both wary of repeating past mistakes. Their courtship was unconventional, riding fence lines together, poring over ranch accounts in the evening, making plans for spring breeding. Sometimes their hands would brush as they worked side by side, or their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and the connection between them would seem almost tangible. The ranch hands accepted the developing relationship with minimal comment. Hank merely nodded in satisfaction when he first noticed Abram and Sophia sitting closer together at meals, as if he'd been expecting it all along. "You're good for her," the old cowhand told Abram one evening as they checked on the horses. "She smiles more now." "She's good for me too," Abram admitted. It was true Sophia's determination and courage had reawakened something in him he'd thought permanently extinguished. By the time February's blizzards gave way to March's thaws, Abram had moved fully into the main house. No formal announcement was made. It simply happened naturally, his few possessions migrating from the foreman's quarters to Sophia's now their home. They complemented each other well. Where Sophia was quick to act, Abram encouraged careful planning. Where he was inclined to expect the worst from people, she reminded him that not everyone was like Elizabeth and her lover. One evening in early April, as they sat before the fire in the study, Sophia reading a letter from a cattle buyer in Cheyenne while Abram cleaned his revolver, he found himself watching her profile in the firelight. The familiar curve of her cheek, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she absently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she concentrated. Something tightened in his chest, a feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Sophia looked up from her letter, startled. "What did you say?" Abram set aside the gun and moved to kneel beside her chair. He took her hands in his, meeting her wide-eyed gaze directly. "Marry me," he repeated. "Be my wife." For a long moment, she simply stared at him. Then, to his consternation, her eyes filled with tears. "Sophia, you said you couldn't risk your heart again," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "After Elizabeth." Abram reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "I thought I couldn't, but you changed that." She shook her head slightly, not in denial but in wonder. "How?" "By being exactly who you are," he said simply. "Strong, honest, stubborn as the day is long." His mouth curved in a smile. "By fighting for what matters to you. By not giving up when things got difficult." Sophia's hands tightened around his. "Are you certain? Marriage is a risk too." "The only certainty I have is that I love you," Abram replied, the words he'd been holding back for months finally spoken aloud. "The rest we'll figure out together." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but now she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Abram Northcott." He pulled her into his arms, her head tucking perfectly beneath his chin. For the first time in years, Abram felt truly at peace. "I love you too, you know," Sophia murmured against his chest. "Have for months now." "I know," he admitted, stroking her hair. "I was just too afraid to believe it." She pulled back to look at him, her expression serious. "I understand why. After what happened in Montana." She cupped his cheek in her palm. "But I'm not Elizabeth. I won't betray you. I know that now." He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Took me long enough to figure it out. We both had our reasons for caution," she said softly. "But I'm glad we found each other despite them." Later, as they lay in bed watching moonlight spill across the floor, Sophia propped herself on an elbow to study his face. "I've been thinking about what you said once," she murmured, trailing a finger along the line of his jaw. "About not being able to risk your heart again." "Seems I've changed my mind about that," Abram replied, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her fingertips. She shook her head, her expression soft in the moonlight. "No, that's just it. You were right to be cautious. Hearts are fragile things." She placed her palm over his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her hand. "But I meant what I said that day by the fence. If you can't risk your heart, then I'll carry it for you." Keep it safe. The simple declaration undid him. Abram pulled her close, his throat tight with emotion. And I'll do the same for yours, he promised. They were married in May, when the ranch was vibrant with new growth and promise. The ceremony was held on the porch where they'd first begun to acknowledge their feelings, with Sheriff Evans officiating and the entire ranch staff in attendance. Sophia wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog in Cheyenne, wildflowers in her hair. Abram wore a new suit that still felt stiff and formal, but the discomfort was forgotten the moment he saw his bride approaching. "You look beautiful," he told her as they joined hands before the sheriff. "You look uncomfortable," she replied with the hint of a smile, "but handsome nonetheless." Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish one another through whatever challenges life might bring. When Sheriff Evans pronounced them husband and wife, Abram kissed Sophia with a tenderness that belied his usual reserve, heedless of the cheers and whistles from their assembled friends. The celebration afterward was joyous, music and dancing continuing well into the night. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Abram found his bride sitting on the porch steps, watching the revelry with contentment. "Happy, Mrs. Northcott?" he asked, settling beside her. Sophia's smile was radiant. "Very much so, Mr. Northcott." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Though I was thinking we might keep the ranch name as Harrison, for my father's sake." "The Harrison Ranch, run by the Northcotts," Abram mused, "has a nice ring to it." She nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "I was also thinking about the south pasture. It would make a good place for a house of our own someday, when we need more space." The implication wasn't lost on Abram. "Planning for the future already?" "Always." She met his gaze directly, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Unless you object to the idea of little Northcotts running around the ranch someday?" Warmth spread through his chest at the thought children with Sophia's determination and spirit, a family of their own. "I think that sounds like the best plan you've had yet," he said, drawing her closer. As the music played on and stars appeared overhead, Abram Northcott reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the bitter betrayal in Montana to finding unexpected love in Wyoming Territory. From a man determined never to risk his heart again to one who had found someone worthy of that risk. And in Sophia's arms, under the vast Wyoming sky, he knew he was finally home.